The next key barrier is struggles with urge surfing and behavior change. And this is really around compulsions and surfing the urge to do compulsions. So, before we do a physical compulsion, there will be a strong urge in our mind and body before that behavior starts. So, we might have thoughts in our mind that are justifying and giving reasons for it. We might have actually our mind's just planning and thinking about how to do the compulsion. There might be, mental compulsions like this going on, or thoughts that are driving the behavior. There likely will be feelings in the body. We might feel the motor circuits firing up, like we're about to move and do the thing. We're about to go and wash our hands, or, our head's about to move to check the item, or about to step away in avoidance, or going to go online and research something. We kind of feel our body about to do it. There'll be emotions in the mix. So really, we have this urge, and the urge, like any behavior, can be very intense. So you think about someone trying to give up an addictive drug or something like that. There's going to be a very strong physical experience of that urge and mental experience of that urge that drives that behavior. And in OCD recovery, often the advice is just, don't do the compulsions, the response prevention. So just drop them, don't do them. And obviously, this is very tough if we are feeling these very intense urges and we haven't been given skills to learn how to surf them. So, urge surfing is a metaphor where the urge is like a wave that increases, gets more and more intense, more and more difficult, then it crests and comes down, and then it's easier to surf. So really, this comes from the world of addictions, a metaphor from addiction recovery. And we want to learn to surf these urges, to be able to ride the rise and fall of them. And the more times we surf them, the easier it gets. I think that it's most apparent in physical compulsions, but it's there in mental compulsions, particularly more overt rumination, where we are more consciously spending a period of time doing mental compulsions. Before that happens, often there'll be an urge and a sense, oh, I need to think about this. I need to figure this out. This is really important. I can almost feel my attention being pulled into my head and starting to spin those loops. And even with more subtle mental compulsions, it's there. There can be like an agitation and a sense of urge before it, but it's very rapid, very quick, and you can only learn to catch that as your observing skills get stronger and you watch your mind more closely. And this relates to those automatic compulsions, the video I did before, where really to learn about that and to get good at that, it's having more precision in our observing skills. We'll be able to catch that stuff. So those more subtle and quicker urges, we need to have very precise observing skills, and that takes training and practice. So yeah, we need to have some skills and tools to help us. These urges are so strong, we can feel, just like people will say, I couldn't resist it, I had no choice, I couldn't not do this compulsion. And it's true, at that time is very, very difficult. And more broadly, behavior change is very tough for humans. You look at the statistics of people changing habits, it's 30% is a broad statistic that goes across a lot of behavior change. That it's very difficult to shift things like healthy living habits, sleep habits, diet, exercise, habits around procrastination and work patterns, and all these sort of goals that we might set. People do struggle to make the changes. And so we've got to be honest with the compulsion side of OCD. Sometimes it's some of the hardest behaviors to change because it's driven by this immense amount of fear and believability, in a sense that this is something really true and something that we need to respond to. And so it's some of the hardest behavior to change. And for me, when I was surfing urges with compulsions, it's like a workout. It's like the most physically intense sort of feeling and experience, and psychologically very intense and difficult. And it really is like a workout. That's where the physical metaphors of sort of emotional and psychological fitness really convey this well, that we are building up, similar to physical fitness, we are strengthening muscles in order to surf these urges. So yeah, urge surfing for me, I think of it like this concept of this wave, this metaphor, and that we're trying to use that metaphor to help us ride that wave. But I've also, in my mind, broken it into three really important steps that I think are very helpful. The first is to actually deconstruct the urge, so to notice and investigate it, to get distance, to diffuse the thoughts that make up the urge, to investigate and break apart the feelings in the body, the sensations and the emotions, and to really get precise and clear about what that urge is made up of, and look at it a piece at a time. And then zoom in on the strongest piece, and you can physicalize it, is an acceptance technique in ACT, where you see it as like a physical object, like what's that restless feeling in your chest, like what sort of shape is it, what kind of weight, temperature, pressure, does it have any physical qualities? So just curiously investigating it gives us some space and distance. You can use labeling and describing to help you to name it, and you can use compassion in there as well to help you to kind of get some distance from the urge. Then once that alone will often help, and if we're really skillful at that, the urge starts to break apart, and it's easier to interrupt it and not follow it. So that alone will often shift it if we're very strong with it. But I found often you need to then bring in your connection to a motivation source to help with that. And the motivation in ACT is really workability and values and goals. So, very simply, we want to think about what this urge is costing us and what we want to avoid, and then what we want to move towards instead, what's bigger and more important than following this urge. So, we might have done some reflective practice on all the costs of compulsions, everything they're taking away from us, how they don't work from our experience in the long run. And then we want to have very clearly our values within the different domains of our life, the kind of person we want to be in relationships, in work, in health and play, and then translating that into very concrete goals and having that in a kind of statement of what I want to be about instead of this urge. So, what's more important here in this moment, and what do I want to follow rather than this urge? So very simply, you might just say to yourself, this doesn't work for me, it's costing me time and relationships and well-being, and I want to be a loving parent instead, or I want to be focused and committed to my work, or I want to be prioritizing my health and well-being, and being proactive about taking care of that. And my goal is, rather than doing this compulsion, to go and connect with someone. So you try to get that very simply into a very succinct sort of statement that talks about the cost, talks about what you want to move towards instead, has some concrete goals, things that you're working on, and you use that as a motivator. You really ask yourself, why would I want to change this? What's it in service of? And then once you've done that reflection, then you choose a valued alternative behavior. So in the context of exposure, it might be just being present and engaging in the exposure and focusing on whatever it might be. But in life, it's going to be, what do I want to spend my time on rather than than compulsions? And it's not distraction. Again, we're not doing this to push away OCD. We're doing this because we value it, and we can bring along the obsessions and the difficult feelings, and they can be there and we can acknowledge them, but we're choosing something that we value more. So do we want to refocus on our work? Do we want to connect and engage with people and be present in communication? Do we want to, have a hobby of some sort, read a book, or listen to something, or create something, or get out and exercise? What are the valued alternatives? that we're going to do instead of the compulsions, and to focus and engage on those, and to really run through these steps as we need to. Sometimes you have to do a lot of the motivational work up front, think about workability, think about values and goals many times to build up the commitment and feeling ready to tackle the compulsions and surf the urge. And then in the moment, you might come back to workability and values and goals just a couple of times, but most of the time you might be noticing and getting some distance from the urge and maybe investigating it and then refocusing on a valued alternative. And you might be flowing back and forth between those things, adding in motivation, adding in maybe some self-compassion as well, if that's helpful. And really, we just want to treat this like as a muscle that we're going to strengthen, get really strong, and then over time, it's going to be easier. Now, what we can also do is have some other principles in place that are helpful. We can be self-compassionate around this process, so infuse each of these steps with self-compassion, and self-compassion around behavior change and why it's so difficult to surf urges. We can also do things like have the concept of slip and recommit. So anytime we catch ourselves doing compulsions, to treat that as a slip and then recommit to our goal of surfing the urges, no matter if we're in the middle of it, we finished it, we're about to begin a compulsion, at whatever point we are, slip and recommit to our goal there. We can urge delay as a really useful tool. So we decide, okay, I may give in to this compulsion, but for now I'm going to delay it 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and to urge surf as you're delaying. So not just to white knuckle it, but to delay it for that length of time and run through these steps and practice these skills. It's a little bit like lifting a weight up, and I can't get it all the way up, but I can do it halfway, or I can at least start to activate the weight, and in doing so I am building some isometric strength and some movement, and then eventually maybe I can start to lift the whole weight. Of course, we can also go down and do lighter weights, and that could be another way. Surf urges that are more easy, everyday urges, behavior change, things that are non-OCD related, checking your phone, exercise habits, diet, sleep, these sorts of things. Saying things you regret, or social urges, to do behaviors that aren't helpful, or maladaptive coping strategies. So these things that are like compulsions, but they're more everyday behaviors that everyone's doing, like excessive distraction, avoidance, thinking strategies, and substances, and social strategies. So we can think about maladaptive coping mechanisms, work on some of them, and then bring those skills into the OCD stuff as well. And I really like this idea from behavioral researcher called BJ Fogg, where you really try to enhance the alternative behavior. You really try to reinforce this change. It's going to be easier to give up a compulsion if the thing I'm doing instead is highly rewarding. And the way we do that is getting more attention in it. We savor it, we celebrate it, and we appreciate it. So we get those skills of savoring and gratitude in there, and celebrating mentally in our mind, just saying, well done, Johnny, you've done a really good job there. Doesn't always feel natural to do that, and some people will have a lot of resistance to that. So you can choose different ways of reinforcing it, maybe just getting your attention more deeply into the alternative behavior. That will be a big reinforcer. But if you can celebrate it, pat yourself on the back, and take in the good, and savor that, and that will help. And you can look at the savoring videos and the gratitude videos, things like that on the channel, to look at that more. The more we reinforce that positive change, the easier it will be, and then it will take on a life of its own. And really taking in that you're living your values and goals, and you're building something bigger and more important than OCD. So I would say, work at your urge surfing as a skill, as a muscle. Look at the videos that I have on the channel on urge surfing, practice it, daily practice it. If you're really trying to work on urge surfing physical compulsions, you'll want to have a daily practice of urge surfing using imaginary urges. So visualizing, what it's like when it comes up, and then practicing urge surfing with that, or working it on everyday urges and other more small things, and then bringing it to the OCD urges more and more, and never giving up, being gentle and relentless, and just slipping and recommitting. Just because you can't surf it now doesn't mean you won't be able to in time. And really, that is how we change it and how we take it from being this believable, terrifying thing to being meaningless noise in our mind and body that doesn't have to drive our behavior. But we have to build up those muscles of urge surfing to do that. So give it a shot. Any questions you have, put them down below. And yeah, good luck with your surfing.